As my friend Adam and I stood in the gargantuan courtyard surrounded by hundreds of monstrous beings in cages, we wondered, what should we do next? We looked at the insane woman. Her dark hair hung in matted, bloody strings around her face, and her eyes were hollow and blank. She looked past us with a 1,000-yard stare. Adam walked up to her, standing only a foot away from her so she couldn't see past him. "What's your name?" he asked softly. She muttered to herself, but I couldn't hear what she was saying. He pointed at me. "This is my friend Jerry, and my name is Adam." She suddenly sprang to attention, her lifeless doll's eyes meeting his gaze. A fleeting moment of lucidity and sanity seemed to return to her.
"My name is Mary,"
she said.
"And you killed my father."
Adam shook his head. "Technically, those mutant bugs killed your father," he responded. "And that was only after you guys tried to kidnap, murder, and eat us. At least, I assume that was your final goal." He said this in such an emotional, deadpan way that I had to resist the urge to laugh. "But I think we need to focus on the present issue. Where the hell are we?" He pointed around at the creatures in the cages. Many of them looked at us, at least those with eyes. Some looked human, but had no hair, eyes, mouth, nose, or ears on their heads. They seemed to breathe through their skin, a slight expansion and contraction rippling through their bodies every few moments. Unexpectedly, with a loud clattering that echoed off the walls of the courtyard, 3 teenagers came running through a small tunnel on the other end of the room. I hadn't noticed the tunnel entrance as it was hidden from my view by closely spaced cages. One of the kids had deep claw marks down his chest, his t-shirt was in tatters, and blood ran in rivulets down the white cloth, turning it a deep red. 2 girls behind him were breathing hard, their eyes wide, looking behind them every few seconds. Then they saw us, before noticing all the creatures in cages all around the courtyard, and went as still as statues. The insane woman, Mary, took advantage of the moment of distraction and ran away back in the direction we had come. "Damn," Adam said, about to sprint after her. I put my hand on his shoulder. "Let her go," I said. Realistically, what are we gonna do? We would either have to keep her around, which means having to constantly watch a lunatic who would kill us in a second, or we would have to tie her up or even kill her. None of those are good choices, and I don't even want the blood of a lunatic cannibal on my hands if I can help it. It's probably better just to let her go. And, of course, I had a feeling we would see her again, though I didn't say this part out loud. The teenage boy with the bloody shirt walked forward, putting his hands out to show he was unarmed. Adam kept the knife with clotted blood in his right hand and covertly shoved his keys with the police mace towards me with his other. I took them, turning the nozzle to the firing position so that at least we would have one ranged weapon to gain an advantage if this group turned out to be as insane as Mary and her father. But as they inched closer, I realized they were just scared kids. I stepped forward, putting the keys in my pocket, showing them my hands. "We're not going to hurt you," I said loudly, my voice echoing through the courtyard. The monster nearest me, a man in a bloody surgeon's outfit with pure white, cataract-covered eyes, stared towards me, agitated by my yelling. "Where do you come from?" "We found this place in Florida," the boy said, walking forward and wincing as he wiped his hand across the deep cuts on his chest. "And we found it in Massachusetts," Adam said. "Was it a random-looking gas station that appeared out of nowhere?" The boy looked uncertain. "Well, we had never been in that part of Florida before," he said. "It was a road trip across the state. We were going to Universal and Disneyland and got a little lost. We were low on gas and found a 24-hour station in the middle of a swamp on some dirt road with no houses for miles. I thought it was weird, but beggars can't be choosers, right? We went inside to pay and the doors locked behind us." I nodded. "Mostly the same story for us," I said. Except I know for a fact that that gas station showed up in less than a day. For all I know, it may have appeared in seconds. And I'm willing to bet if we talk to more people here, they would have similar stories, except they all probably come in at different locations. The last group we ran into sounded like they had Australian accents, and I would be willing to bet that if we went further in, we would find people from all over. This thing must be showing up randomly across the world and letting people in like a lobster trap. Once you get in, you can't get out, but have to keep going deeper and deeper inside to look for a way out.
Until what?
Adam said.
The lobster fisherman catches us and lets us out?
I laughed. The fisherman only lets lobsters out when they're ready to boil them alive, I said. He frowned at this. Do you guys have any weapons? One of the girls interrupted. She was a short, skinny redhead. Adam pointed back the way we had come.
There are a couple weapons back in that chamber back there, but I wouldn't head back that way,
he said.
There were bugs who eat people alive, but somehow there was a warning first, almost like a trap was set off. It sounded like a tornado siren or something similar.
She nodded.
It was the same with us,
the redhead said.
We took the stairs down and ended up finding a small tunnel immediately off the left under the torches. As soon as Jason stepped past the first stone, though, a wailing sound started and something came out of the walls.
The boy named Jason continued her story. It was all hunched over, and it looked like there was a secret trapdoor built into the wall. Then a smell like sulfur and roadkill came out, like a wave of stench, and it took these huge claws and swiped my chest. He lifted his shirt and I gasped. The blood hadn't started to clot, but still kept running down in streams. He must have lost quite a bit of blood by this point, but the adrenaline seemed to keep him going. Black and purple lines went out from the cuts in all directions, reminding me of a wound that had gone septic or homeless heroin addicts I had seen in documentaries whose injection sites had gotten infected and begun to spread towards their heart. But this was far different from any sepsis. As I watched, I could see it worsen moment by moment. Pieces of his skin began to fall off, bones morphing and ripping through his clothes.
Oh God, it hurts! Please, something is wrong!
Jason said, reaching out towards me. Droplets of blood began to fall from his right eye, then his left one, and he started screaming as his body began to transform into something else. The third girl in the group, a tall brunette teenager, began to point behind Jason and scream. I saw a glimpse of a shorter red-headed teenage girl, identical to the one in the group, except this one was missing multiple fingers and her clothes were torn and covered in blood. Blood poured out of her hand where the stumps of the fingers reflexively tightened and loosened on nothing. She looked like she had been stung over and over, her face swollen. The injured doppelganger looked back at the whole one in shock as Jason fell to the floor. His screams stopped, but pieces of bone had started to grow out of his back. He writhed and seized, his eyes rolling into the back of his head and coming back to focus on me a couple more times.
Who are you?
The injured redhead said to the uninjured one, who showed an ear-to-ear grin and began to float above the ground. Her eyes turned red, like flaming embers, and her skin began to rapidly darken into a black sheen. Her body grew, the legs and arms lengthening as all the clothes began to be reabsorbed inside the body of the monster. The injured girl screamed as a floating set reached out his arm towards her, softly rubbing the side of her swollen cheek before quickly grabbing her by the jaw and snapping her neck. The sound of the bone fracturing and the look of horror and torment in that girl's eyes were haunting. The brunette girl had used the distraction to run over next to Adam and me. Seth turned his gaze back towards us, ignoring Jason, who was still having a seizure on the ground, spitting out foamy blood.
You both intrigue me,
he said to Adam and me in a guttural tone.
It seemed to come from the walls around us as well as his reptilian mouth.
"But especially you,"
he said, pointing to me.
"I will make a deal with you, Jerry. Give me your soul, and I will tell you the way to the exit at the center of the labyrinth."
I shook my head at this. "How about you go fuck yourself?" I said, spiteful. Set only laughed. Behind him, Jason had stopped seizing and now looked to be either unconscious or dead.
"In that case,"
Set said,
"out of a spirit of fairness, I will give you 3 survivors a 5-minute head start before."
He pointed to the cages all around us at the sides of the courtyard, smiling. The brunette girl gasped, her mouth a small O of fear. "You wouldn't," she said, starting to cry. Set laughed at this and put his hands up towards the sky. Adam grabbed one of her hands and they followed my lead as I sprinted towards the tunnel Mary had taken earlier. I hoped maybe we could find her again and force her to show us a way towards the center of this maze of horrors where Set claimed freedom lay. As we ran into the dark, cramped tunnels, glowing symbols that hadn't been there before began to illuminate the path before us. We came to the massive chamber where we found Mary weeping over the body of her dead father. Her clothes were in tatters, her back scarred with countless tiny symbols that had been engraved into her flesh. They reminded me of Tibetan scripts I had seen, or the constructed Elvish language in The Lord of the Rings. The body of her father was swollen to twice its normal size, small dribbles of clotted blood coming out of his face, ears, nose, and mouth. I saw hundreds of the dead human-faced insects around his body, many of them crushed or with their wings ripped off. It looked as if he had gone down fighting. I wondered where the mutated bugs had gone, but time was running short and I knew that would be a mystery better left for another time. Adam grabbed Mary by the shoulder and rapidly explained the situation. Her eyes dried up rapidly, and even though she seemed to look past us at invisible shadow people or whatever other hallucination her insane mind made up, she understood enough of it. Then, Set's voice echoed all around us, coming from nowhere and everywhere.
"Time is up, friends,"
he said, a tone of glee and amusement in his voice.
"Open the cages. Release the wanderers."
From very far off, I heard metal doors slamming open and knew we had to act. "Mary, show us the way to the safest room you know," I said. "We need time to think and..." Except at that moment, time had run out. We hadn't counted on the demonic form of Jason tearing out of the darkness at superhuman speeds and jumping on the brunette girl. He began to slash and rip at her with huge black talons. His body was hunched, spikes sticking out of his spine. His lips were missing, showing huge bloody teeth instead. And his eyes and skin had turned a pure, sickly white, the deep claw marks on his chest totally healed now. Adam tried stabbing at the monster with his small dagger, but then I remembered that we had weapons only a few feet away where we had first been abducted. I ran towards the door, grabbing my scimitar. As the monster was focused on ripping the brunette girl to pieces, I came up from behind it and swung as hard as I could. Time seemed to slow down as the sword connected with its neck. The inertia took it deeper and deeper, the monster uttering a final shriek that was cut off at the same time as its throat was severed. The head fell to the floor, the white eyes still looking up at me with hatred, the lipless mouth still opening and closing like a fish suffocating on land. The limp body of the monster fell backwards, showing the damage to the girl beneath. Well, she was not dead yet. I knew it was only a matter of moments. Her throat had been slashed open, pieces of her skin on her chest were missing, and I could see spurts of bright red blood exiting out of a dozen gashes every time her heart beat. She tried to speak, but only choked on her own blood. She died with her eyes open, staring in fear and horror.
"We have to go," Adam said, pulling at my arm. I saw he had gone and grabbed his mace from in front of the locked door 20 feet away and realized he was right. I could hear footsteps approaching down the tunnel we had taken. Mary was clearly agitated, even more than usual, and was gibbering and saying something unrecognizable. Adam prodded her in the back, whispering something to her, and she nodded and began running. We both followed closely behind. She took us to a completely different tunnel. This one went further down in a spiraling ramp. We ran for at least 10 minutes, and the ramp never leveled off. Torches lined the walls on both sides, giving us light. I wondered just how many stories beneath the ground we were now. It must have been hundreds. Finally, after what felt like over a mile of descending, we came to a cave system that seemed to glow with its own inner blue light. Stalagmites and stalactites made sharp spikes on both sides of us. Mary pointed to a small door to the right that had been hewn from the rock itself. It had a symbol on it I had never seen before, resembling a spiral with an arrow pointing up.
"That means food,"
Mary said in a hushed voice.
"There are a few of these rooms, though many of them have traps in them."
She pushed through and showed us a room filled with cans and bottles. Most of them were empty and thrown to the side, but I saw dozens more were still unopened along the metal shelving of the back wall. Adam and I quickly shut the door and looked at the food supplies. I realized I was starving. All of the running and adrenaline had exhausted me, and just the thought of food made my mouth start to water. We quickly opened up some cans of tuna fish and found some bottles of soda in the corner. While all three of us ate and drank as rapidly as we could, we tried to formulate a plan. "Do you know where the center of the labyrinth is, Mary?" Adam asked her. She seemed to take more of a liking to him than me. It wasn't uncommon, as Adam was very talkative, selfless, and a gregarious person, while I was more of an introvert and a loner. To my surprise, Mary nodded yes to the question. A slim ray of hope entered my mind for the first time in what felt like forever. Adam's eyes sparkled too, as he was excited by the prospect of getting closer to escape.
"We are heading there now,"
she said while scooping out little bites of plain tuna fish with her disgusting, dirty fingers and forcing them into her mouth.
"There are less traps at the center, but no food or drink. That's why Daddy and I always stayed closer to the edge, where we could get long pork." She smiled at this. "You mean people to eat?" I said, and Adam shot me a glance telling me to shut up, but Mary only smiled wider. "Yes. Otherwise, I would have starved months ago. We have to stretch our food supplies here. But I grew to like the taste of long pork, especially when it was dried and cooked. It reminded me of jerky," she said, licking her lips. "Mary, how long have you been down here?" Adam asked. Mary only shook her head. "Must have been years,"
she said, frowning, looking at her sickly, emaciated frame. The rags she wore that once had been clothes, and the way her shoes were falling apart, I thought she was probably right. Then we began to hear footsteps outside the door. We all stopped speaking instantly, Adam and I grabbing our weapons and standing ready to fight. I motioned to Mary, and Adam nodded, giving her the dagger back that we had stolen from her father. I wondered whether it was a smart move, seeing as she was clearly insane and might just stab us in the back and try to eat us. But I had a feeling we didn't have much of a choice. An old quote ran through my mind. "Misery acquaints a man with strange bedfellows." And I almost felt an urge to chuckle, thinking just how true that really was. Something slammed against the door, sending it flying open. Adam and I waited a moment, Mary behind us. We were out of view of the door, but standing next to the threshold so that if someone walked through, we could attack from the side as soon as they stepped foot into the room. It was what ended up happening, as the surgeon in the bloody mask entered, a scalpel raised.
I tried to bring my Shimtar down on his head, but he was amazingly fast, ducking at the penultimate moment. The sword whistled harmlessly overhead. He stuck his scalpel into my leg, making me yell out in pain, but Adam took the moment of distraction to bring his mace smashing down on the man's skull. Bits of brain, hair, and blood flew out, some of it landing on my lips or my mouth, and I felt the urge to throw up as the coppery taste of blood and gore overwhelmed me. I started wiping furiously at my lips and spitting. The burning pain from my leg rose up, and looking down, I saw rivulets of blood soaking into my blue jeans. I hoped it hadn't hit an artery.
"We need to go now,"
Mary hissed at us, and we both nodded. I was significantly slowed down now, hobbling alongside them, but the pain wasn't as bad as I expected. I had figured it had been an extremely lucky shot to avoid crippling me or causing me to bleed out down here. Adam ripped off a piece of his t-shirt and made an impromptu bandage, tightening it with knots. We heard more footsteps behind us, and all three of us found huge stalagmites to hide behind. Peeking out in the subtle glow of the cave, we saw a few of the faceless humanoids pass by us. One wearing an expensive black suit, and the other two wearing hiking clothes and windbreakers. Their faceless heads seemed to ripple, expanding and contracting, and I wondered if it was a result of them breathing through their skin. I wondered just what they were, in fact. Mary nodded us to keep going forward, and we did. I heard shrieks ahead of us. Looking around a bend in the cave, I saw two middle-aged men trying to fight off the faceless monsters. One of them had a pistol. He raised it to the chest of one of them, blowing its heart out. The monster fell back, but another grabbed him from behind, and the other living monster quickly knocked out the second man, grabbing his head and smashing it into the stone walls of the cave. The two monsters worked in tandem, one reaching out to the conscious man's chest. His fingers gently touched the fabric of the shirt, then, with unimaginable strength, began to pull the man's skin and bones apart. The man shrieked, coughing up blood, but the other monster had his arms pinned behind his back too tightly for him to fight back. Soon, they had his heart out of his chest, and the man's head slumped to the side. One of the monsters put it up to his blank head. The head appeared to split open in the middle, thousands of tiny black lamprey teeth showing for a moment as he ate the man's heart. They let the dead body fall to the side, and the other monster repeated the process with the unconscious man, eating his heart as well. Then they continued forward, the only remaining sign of their passing being three dead bodies with massive holes in their chest. One of them from a gunshot, and the other two from something far more horrendous. Mary, Adam, and I began to move forward again. Countless footsteps were now approaching from behind, and we all began to run as fast as we could. Soon, the cave system ended, and we came out into an ancient oak forest. The two monsters were waiting for us there, and Adam and I quickly walked forward attacking. I quickly dispatched mine, but the one attacking Adam was too quick. The monster had gotten behind Adam and was about to grab him by the neck when Mary jumped in, stabbing her dagger into the spot where the abomination's face should have been. It gave an ear-splitting shriek as its head opened up and it fell back dying. But the distraction had allowed dozens more monsters from their cages to reach the end of the cave. We all ran for our lives. "This way," Mary said, panting. She took us down a small deer trail, and we found an ancient stone cellar with a heavy door attached. We all got in, and I found it had a latch to lock it from the inside. Adam stuck his mace through the latch just as a monster approached us from the outside, beginning to smash at it. I heard dozens more footsteps from all around us, and I knew we were surrounded. "Well, this is it," I said, sitting down and sighing. "There's no escaping this one. We can't fight off all those monsters out there." Mary sat down too, humming to herself, but I noticed tears were now flowing down her face. Adam only grinned at me, taking his backpack off.
"Did you forget?" Adam asked. "I grabbed that book when we first got in here. I told you my instincts were screaming at me to take it."
He pulled the large, ancient tome out with the title, The Angel of Death, written on the front, drops of blood constantly dripping off the front of it. The voice of Set began to vibrate and reverberate all around us.
Will you give your souls yet, friends?
He asked.
There is no need for you all to die like sheeps led to the slaughter. For I am the good shepherd, and I hate to see my sheeps ripped apart by the wolves.
He laughed at this. Adam ignored the voice coming from nowhere and everywhere and opened the book. The pages were blank at first, but then the text written in blood began to appear. The book was upside down from my point of view, but Adam quickly read it, frowning.
Mary, let me see the knife.
Adam said, putting out his hand. Mary handed it over.
According to this book, all I need to do is say a prayer and carve his name into my arm, and this thing will come to us and save us all.
The door of the stone cellar began to shake more violently as more bodies seemed to show up by the minute. You had better hurry up then, I said to him. We don't have much time until those things break through.
Fools!
The voice of Set screamed.
You should not open that book. Do you wish to bring the Watcher to your world? The Watcher would kill the sun, destroy the moon, blot out every star. The Watcher does not care at all for your lives.
He continued to ramble, but we all ignored it. And Adam began the ritual. The poem appeared in blood on the pages, and he began to read it, holding the knife over his left arm.
An old man dies. A newborn breathes. The maggots feast. The infection seethes. Winter enters and never leaves. The lone dissenter lives and deceives. The angel of death arise again. The eternal cycle of a bloody rain.
As he read the last stanza, he also cut the name Azrael into his left arm, wincing for a moment as the sharp knife did its work. Then he held his arm above his head. The blood trickled down his arm, forming and reforming into larger and larger rivulets. As soon as the first drop reached the center of his chest, appearing to defy gravity as it rolled down and back up his chest, an amazing and horrible thing started to happen. Adam's eyes began to emanate a soft, glowing white light, and he began to float above the ground. Behind him, I saw dozens of visions of his floating body splitting off as if I was looking into a mirror image reflected into another mirror image. The dozens kept going until it looked like hundreds, then millions, then eternity, disappearing into a point at the horizon. Each of the bodies began to fade in and out. Then eyes started to come into view, swarming and morphing all over these countless bodies. Soon I couldn't see anything that once had been Adam. His entire body was covered in soft, glowing white eyes that stared out into all directions at once. Then the billions of eyes on the eternal bodies all turned to me at once. I felt an impending sense of terror and doom of an intensity I had never imagined possible. Who calls on me? A soft voice said from everywhere and nowhere at once. It slightly shook the walls and floor. I tried to look away, but I couldn't. The eternal copies of Adam's body all collapsed into one in a single moment, and I was back to just staring at the spot where Adam's body had been. The endless hallway of mirror images disappearing instantly. Mary stood up, backing away to the very edge of the cellar. I knew I had to answer, even though all those staring eyes seemed to bring me to the brink of madness. We need your help, Azrael, I said. The angel laughed as the door began to splinter. I could see claws and hands reaching through, feeling around for what held it shut. One of them began to snake close to the mace and shake it loose. And why would I help you? He asked, the voice seeming to shake the ground with every syllable. Because, I said, pointing. Set has released those things to kill your host's body, and without a host, I have a feeling you'll be going back to whatever otherworldly prison you came from. The eyes of the angel all turned towards the door as the mace fell out and the door swung open. Dozens of monsters began to pour in. The floating angel laughed at this. Raising his arms, huge thorns and spikes began to shoot out of the leaves and dirt, wrapping around each of the monsters and dragging them into the ground. Within seconds, their screams had all ceased. No one stood there. From behind me, I heard another deeper voice. Set's fiery eyes were embedded into the stone wall, and he stepped out. His black, poisonous body appearing at once. He and the angel of death stared at each other for a long moment. Mary grabbed my arm, and we began to back out of the stone cellar. As we got to the threshold, Set raised one arm, and the ceiling began to collapse on Azrael. Massive blocks of stone fell on his head, and within seconds he was buried. The cacophony of the collapsing structure made my ears ring, and Mary and I began to sprint blindly ahead. As I looked back, I saw the stones go flying up in the air. Azrael floating up from the place where the stone cellar had stood. Set was also flying, glancing down at his enemy with hatred. Azrael raised an ethereal hand, and a huge oak tree was ripped out of the ground and went flying in Set's direction. He easily blocked it, flying higher into the forest and letting it pass harmlessly underneath him. Up ahead, I saw a hatchway in the middle of the forest. It didn't look like it belonged, but I knew we had to find somewhere to hide. As Set and Azrael fought, I ran up to it, opening it up, and what I saw astonished me. I was looking down into the hatchway, but on the other side, I was looking through the spot next to where Adam and I had parked my car. I looked back and saw Azrael and Set throwing fire and lava at each other, setting the forest alight all around them. I nodded at Mary and she jumped through without hesitation. Then I followed. It was a disorienting experience, going down through the hatchway only to find myself crawling up out of a secret dirt door a few feet in front of my car. As soon as I was out, the door slammed shut behind me, and it turned back into flat dirt. I looked around and saw there was no longer a gas station there either, just endless trees. I brought Mary to the hospital and then went home, wrapping up my own wounds with a first aid kit. I didn't know what to do about Adam. After washing and sleeping, I decided to go to the police station the next day and report Adam missing. I told them that I brought him home from work, but that I hadn't been able to get in contact with him since. They ignored my report, saying that if he still hadn't shown up in a couple days, I should come back. I have a feeling that I will likely never see him again. His sacrifice allowed Mary and me to escape that horrid place, however. I hope he is still alive somewhere, and that maybe he will find a way out, just like we did. But whenever I sleep now, I hear Adam screaming. In my dreams, he always has pure white irises and pupils, and he always looks around with terror, asking where he is. Behind him, I see an eternal sky covered in ethereal glowing eyes.